Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungar. This is a new conversation with a creative human. Please visit soundslikeportraits.com, and if you like this show, don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. Thank you. This week, I met visual artist Howard Gross. Throughout his career, which started in Chicago in the 70s, Howard was very keen on experimenting very different techniques and mediums. At first, after graduating from Art Institute of Chicago, his choice was oil on canvas. Then he turned to box sculptures, from which he proceeded to relief sculptures, but he didn't stop there. When he moved to New York, he started to photograph cracks in the city. Later on, he started to photograph people in the art world with their eyes closed. Leo Castelli, Betty Parsons, Louise Bourgeois, among many others, accepted to be photographed without posing in front of him. So, how does Howard condition himself to look at the world as an adventure? That's the question of the week. Listen to Howard's answer, but before, he told me what he tried to do all his life.
All my life, I've tried to be true to myself. I basically wanted the art that I made to reflect the world around me. And looking back at it at this time in my life, I realized much of it dwelt with the preservation of moments. What motivated that was the passing of moments, was seeing my mom die in front of me. And then after that, I noticed little things like a bug sitting on my table, a fly flying on the wall. Everything took on amazing meaning to me. That life was that precious that we had to document it and keep a record of it. And 50 years later, I have so much papers and files, and because I can't really throw anything away.
How did you come to art? Was it an alternative at the time for you?
No, it was very simple. I didn't speak until I was 3 years old, but my mother had given me paper and pencil to draw. I was drawing to communicate before I spoke. My mother loved to do watercolors. We used to go on drawings in the country and sketch together. She loved pastels, And her love of it was something that I just grabbed onto immediately. I went to the Art Students League when I was on weekends for a painting class. My mother went for a watercolor class. I went to the High School of Music and Art eventually. Then I went to a college in Connecticut, Hartford Art School, and then the Art Institute of Chicago. But after high school, I was so young when I graduated because I'd been skipped so many times previously. I was 16 years old when I got out of high school. I never really could participate socially because everyone considered me to be a kid, which I was 13 when I started. So there was a period where I wasn't sure where I was going to go, what I was going to do. And I was in the library. And I was browsing through the shelves, and I saw a catalog for this school in Connecticut, the Hartford Art School. And I thought, wow, that would be magnificent to get on my own, go to Connecticut, So admitting what I did was I ripped out the application from the back of the catalog, and I applied to the school. My parents didn't even know I had applied until I told them I was accepted. My father, was looking at me like, and who's going to pay for this? And I was like, I didn't give that any thought, but nothing's going to stop me from going, So then I went to school in Connecticut, which was great.
Who paid for that?
Well, my mother certainly must have helped him change his mind, but I also immediately became the editor of the school publication and president of my student government. So I got partial scholarships as well to help do it. I can't tell you how much that getting away, being away from my home environment. Because my father was a bit restrictive. I don't want to say anything negative, but I mean, he was overpowering.
Conservative.
To say the least. Didn't really understand my art or what I was doing at all. And I was conservative too, visually. Until I was 20, I wore a shirt and tie, even in school in Connecticut, with a smock, when all my fellow students were wearing long hair and stuff like that. But then I discovered things about myself that I didn't even know I had the ability to do. I became, besides president of my student government, editor of a school publication. I was selected to be the student representative on the university to the board of trustees. So I sat around the board table with like former heads of United Aircraft and Whitney and the former assistant, the head of the RAND Corporation. And I was like arguing with these people. Like I didn't even, one of my friends said, you don't argue with the head of this, you don't do that.
Arguing about what?
Oh, the direction of my school. I mean, in one case, I'm glad you asked me that. The first week or 2 weeks of school, the director of the art school, the Hartford Art School, spoke to the students, the freshman class. I had been wandering all over the building looking for a darkroom, and I couldn't find one. So when I asked him a question, I said, I couldn't find the darkroom. I said, is it in the basement? And he said, this was like 1965, I think. He said, this is an art school. There's no place for photography in an art school. So I said, okay, this guy's got to go, or I go, one or the other, And on the Board of Regents, I basically helped convince the trustees of my own school and of their school to finally get him to resign, which I guess was good for everybody in a way. I mean, they ended up having a film department and everything else eventually,
At that time, what did it mean for you to be an artist? What was the dream behind that?
You know what? I never thought of myself as anything else. I mean, my whole life, making art and expressing myself visually was just like breathing, I tell people. I mean, it's just, I never gave it a thought. I never thought I'd ever do anything else. And I never thought it would take the twists and turns that it did, in the form. But I did always want to challenge myself. So, I mean, like I always wanted to bring myself out of my comfort zone, I guess I like interaction, and if it sounds like I'm provoking, I think art should definitely provoke people. When I came here from Chicago, I was just so amazed at the cracks in the street. Most people, they get a crack on their wall or they get a wrinkle in their face, they can't wait to cover it up, I mean, it's like, it's a bad thing, it's a negative thing, but as a visual art person, a cracked sidewalk is so much more interesting than a clean, flat, plain sidewalk,
What is so interesting behind that? What is so interesting for you behind the cracks?
Well, the show was called Cracks and Imperfections Due to Stress. So, I mean, these were natural occurrences that happened to a surface and created these incredibly intricate and interesting things. So, I actually got some collectors to bring me to their homes after the O.K. Harris show to sign the cracks on their walls. And one really prominent art collector, Agnes Gund from MoMA, brought me to her home in Greenwich, Connecticut, and her daughter and I did a tour of her house, and I signed some cracks on their walls. And then I did a book of cracks for her only. She also bought a document of one of my cracks from my show, a crack I signed in Harlem. I went from one tip of Manhattan to the other, searching for these. And I was with my girlfriend at the time, Cunye, and we were like on 125th Street in front of a store, and I was photographing the cracks in the sidewalk. I guess the guy came out, he said a white guy taking photographs in this neighborhood in Harlem is not a safe thing to do. So he warned me, he said, I don't know what you're doing, but don't do it. But I did get that picture, and it ended up being owned by Agnes. The thing is, the reason I bring this up too is many, many years later, and she was participated in other projects of mine. I mentioned the cracks to her, and she said to me that my work was the most depressing thing in her collection. And that's in a collection of over 2,000 pieces. So I consider that to be an achievement.
You saw cracks as art?
Yes.
Where begins art for you?
That's an interesting question, I guess. I guess it's the lineal qualities of the cracks are basically what I compared to drawings. I mean, they look like drawings to me, which I was doing already in that particular way. And they were fascinating. I still look at them now. I mean, I just recently, with my phone, took a picture of a crack in Central Park. It was the first time I'd done it in years. But what I understood, with every gesture you make, I mean, you see what you're doing in one way, but the other way people perceive it, you never can imagine what other people think you're saying or why you're doing something.
Would you say that art is in the eye of the person who is seeing rather than in the objects?
Certainly. I mean, art as object is something that I guess I was rebelling against. I was sort of felt that art shouldn't have to be a precious item necessarily that had to be purchased or acquired, that it could be found anywhere you go if you just look at it. I don't want to say things negative, certainly, about my father, but like one of these documents that I had in the show with the cracks, I was with my family, and my father took the document and said, "Did you sell it?" And I said, "Well, no. I didn't. Maybe I will, but no, I didn't." And I hate to mention this in a way because I don't want people to think of him negatively, but he took it, put it on the floor in front of guests, and kicked it across the room and said, "Well, then it's shit," And I think that's the problem, that too many people see art as a commodity. I got it for the exhibition. I got a map of Manhattan, and I put little red dots in the map so that people could go to the actual crack and see the location. And so I wanted them to be able to find the cracks and identify them because I wanted them to see the real crack. So that was behind that, I think.
I love this quote by Leonard Cohen, the singer. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. What do you think about it?
Well, I did recall a line that Francis Naumann is an art dealer that I know. And he said to me years later that I had fallen through the cracks. And I thought that was a really appropriate assessment, But to see light through the cracks is similar to saying that you can see better if you close your eyes, I think.
Absolutely.
So it's a similar kind of statement.
Do you agree with that?
In a way, because what he's saying is what I'm trying to say is that there's a positive element to a fissure, to a crack, not a negative one.
What's essential in cracks, it's not the cracks themselves.
It's what they represent, I think. And they represent decay in a way. And that, too, so many people think of as a negative thing. So there's always that relationship between decay and growth. Decay produces a great positive thing.
Did you have a clear idea of what you were doing at the time?
I knew what I was trying to do. I was trying to alert people to see a positive where they saw a negative. To see beauty in what they considered to be not. That's what an artist's role is, to get people to see what's right in front of them that they're not noticing without, just like you're trying to guide me through this conversation. I tried to guide people through visual experience. Did you ever notice that over there? A lot of people do, but most people don't. They don't even think of looking, That's so important. It's absolutely important.
How would you define what a good eye for art is?
You're asking a very complex question. I think, there's some great collectors who perceived artists that nobody thought were doing anything worthwhile before anyone did, because something in them, their intelligence, allowed them to notice that this was valuable. They'd be followed by many other people later on buying that work and then making it valuable. But it's the original people who bought it when nobody thought it was anything, that had some kind of special intelligence and special eye. Unfortunately, most people rely on other people to tell them what art is. I mean, they rely on art dealers, critics. I mean, they're not going to make that judgment in a vacuum. I mean, most people aren't that confident with their own judgment. I just am always surprised by what I'm seeing in front of me, and I mean, I'm tempted at this point in my life to get a camera again, but it would be a digital one, which I was against doing for a long time because I'm not a big fan of the concept of digital photography, having been inspired by the greatest photography darkroom people that ever lived. I feel that I'd be betraying them almost by doing that, and myself. And I also love seeing an image come out of chemicals in front of me. And the subtleties of that, I don't believe I'm going to be able to get. Everywhere I go, I see something that I think should be preserved. I mean, I see images all the time that I feel I'm missing because I'm not documenting them. I remember more of the images that I missed taking as much as I remember the images I did take,
Being surprised, that could be a good definition of a good eye. If I am surprised, something is happening.
If you condition yourself to look at the world as an adventure and try to discover something exciting in it every moment of every day if you can, then you're just going to be ready for the moment when something happens to you. I mean, like, you can anticipate it, but be prepared for it.
How do you get prepared for it? How do you condition yourself to be open?
I just had a very focused way of looking at things. I mean, I had no TV, no telephone in my loft, just a dark room. I mean, my whole life was observing what was around me and thinking about it, and that was my entertainment. That's where I was perceiving the world, the joy of it, After I did the show of cracks, I told my art dealer, Ivan Karp, I have another idea for an exhibit. I'm going to photograph the art world with their eyes closed. And he said, who's going to close their eyes for you? I'm sure he threw in a few expletives there, but it was like, who's going to close their eyes for you? So I walked up 2 blocks to 420 West Broadway where Leo Castelli had his gallery. Ivan had worked for him before he had his own space, And Leo was sitting at his desk. And so I approached him and I introduced myself and I said to him, I'm photographing the art world with their eyes closed, and I wondered if you would participate. And he got up from his desk and he walked over to the wall and he said, is this a good spot? And I took his picture, and that was my first closed eye picture. So I guess I figured out who would close their eyes for me. And then on 23rd Street, the woman who shared the back half of my floor, we shared the entrance to the floor, but she had the back half, I had the front half, had worked for Betty Parsons and was a close friend of hers. And Betty would come over every now and then. And I asked Betty just one day, Betty, would you just do me a favor and sit down and close your eyes for me? And so she did. And then Gene Smith closed his eyes for me. So I had 3 really influential and really significant human beings almost at the very beginning. And I glued those little pictures into a little 5x7 book. And I would go to openings and galleries and ask people to close their eyes for me and show them the book. And then they would close their eyes for me.
What is so interesting in showing people with their eyes closed? You're a visual artist. What is so interesting?
That was really part of it, is that it's the exact opposite of what visual people do. It's like they're using their eyes all the time, so I wanted to put them in a context which was opposite from that. But beyond that, when you're looking at a person, aiming a camera at you, posing for them, it's like I just wanted to be less involved in that moment. Like I wanted the person to be able to get into themselves and be alone in my presence without feeling they were being with me. And I think for those few seconds that they're closing their eyes, they're alone. One of the best compliments I ever received about my photographs or portraits was that I was told that my presence wasn't the first thing people think of, which is when you see many famous portrait of famous people, you know immediately who the photographer was because their style is just so well known and so prominent in the way that they set up the image is a signature kind of thing. I really didn't give too many people too much time to pose for these images. I would snap them spontaneously, immediately, in a moment's notice, and I didn't necessarily have the right lighting, or be able to orchestrate all that. So they were very kind of quick images for the most part.
It's really a moment of silence.
I think I once named a piece Listening to Silence. I also did a piece Listening for the Sound of Smoke. I mean, when you see someone with their eyes closed, I guess maybe that's solitude, and solitude would make you think it's a quiet situation. Some people smiled. Most people just look kind of thoughtful, I guess, But I mean, I can tell you anecdotal stories of some of the portraits. Certainly, when I first started doing the piece, not everyone agreed to do it. I had a friend, Marguerite, and we were sitting in the East Village at an outdoor cabaret, and this lady came up to us who she knew, and she looked at me and she said, "Are you an artist?" And I said, "Yes, are you?" And she said, "I am Louise Bourgeois," and I didn't realize that. So then I said, "Louise, I'm photographing people with their eyes closed. Would you be willing to do this for me, And she said, "Absolutely not. It's scary," I think she said. 20 years later, when I was doing this piece for PS1 for the reopening, I went back to many of the original subjects. And I was with a friend walking in Chelsea in West 20s. We're going past this street, and my friend points up at the steps in front of one of these brownstones, like she's seeing a god or something. And Louise Bourgeois was sitting on the front stoop of her house. So I went, "Oh yeah, it's Louise." And she said, "Do you know her?" And I said, "Yes." So I introduced her to Louise, and she goes, "Did you close your eyes for Howard?" And Louise said, "No, I did not." And she said, "Why not?" And Louise said, "I don't remember." So then I said, "Well, does that mean you'll do it now?" So she said, "Okay." So I said, "All right, I'll be back tomorrow with my camera." So I went back with my camera, and she opened the door and she said, "I changed my mind." And I said, "Louise, 20 years of this." I says, I will not accept that. You're going to let me do this. So she said, "Okay." She brought me into the house. She had a little garden in the back. She combed her hair. She said, "These are the rules. I'll close my eyes for you, but you give me the negatives. I'll have a proof sheet made. If I like it, I'll send it back to you and I'll send you back the negatives. Otherwise, I destroy them." So I said, "Okay." So she sent me back the negatives and she sent me back the proof sheet. And then I sent her a release to sign.
Did you have conversations with Larry Gagosian?
Yes. I went to take his photograph with his eyes closed to his office. He accepted, but then he called me up and said his eyes were too puffy. Could I come back and take another photograph? So I came back a second time, and I took photographs, and he had these sunglasses he put on. You could see his eyes through the sunglasses, but he put those over his eyes to sort of give him a barrier,
Did you accept?
Yeah, I did.
With his sunglasses?
Yes, I used those. You can see his eyes through that, and it's part of the exhibit. What's interesting that you asked me that It's about a year or so ago, I was at his Madison Avenue gallery for an exhibition that he was having with a young friend of mine. And I almost stepped on this man's foot, and then I looked up. It was Larry Gagosian standing there in the background looking at everybody, you know. So I introduced myself and I said, I don't know, Mr. Gagosian, if you remember me, but I photographed you with your eyes closed 20 years ago. And he said, no, I don't remember. And he'd made me come back twice to take the picture. The other great moment like that was I was with my same young friend, couldn't believe this was happening again, in Paula Cooper's gallery. And she was sitting quietly in a corner. This was one of her satellite galleries. And I walked in and saw her sitting there, so I went over to her and I reminded her that I had photographed her like at the very first series with her eyes closed. And her director sitting at the computer said, could we see those? So I said, yeah, go to my website. And I have some of those pictures up on there. So we went to the website. Paula Cooper got up from where she was sitting and came over to the website. And she was looking, she went, is that Aggie? Is that, she recognized, I don't put the names on it, so people have to know who those people, but she was thrilled. And the thing is, she wouldn't do it for me the second time, which was 20 years after the first. And I asked her, told her, she said, yeah, I'm very happy with the first picture, you know.
Howard, what's the difference for you between a photographer and someone who takes photographs?
You know, that's part of the problem with digital photography for me, and I'm not going to gain a great many fans on this, you know. Anyone can take a good picture, but not everyone's a great photographer. To figure out what the difference is an interesting question.
What makes you say that a photograph is good or not good?
Well, when you think of the photographs that really have impressed human beings and made them, like Gene Smith's photographs, they're just amazing. They reach the soul of the subjects, you know. It's his compassion. It's his humanity that he's using to take those pictures. And it comes through. You know, I mean, it comes through the image. Like I said, yes, there are millions of amazing things around us at every moment of every day. And the camera's going to capture that, even if we didn't realize it ourselves, then we'll see it. But I think that the mind and the eye, and someone like Robert Frank also, I mean, they captured something in people. You know, Dorothea Lange, you know, people like that. That just reached my heart, you know. I mean, it just made me feel emotion and compassion for the subjects. Journalistic photographers speak better to me than other people because they had a message they were conveying. A good photographer is telling you a story. I mean, there's so many great photographers like that, Gordon Parks, you know, I mean, who just make a difference in your life when you look at their work.
Are you still inspired by your early works?
Most definitely. I mean, now that I'm looking at what I did, the fact that I focused on the preservation of moments is resonating with me at this particular time in my life more than you'll ever know, because I just feel much more fragile. I feel just much more uncertain about what the future has. I'm spending more time engaging, even with strangers, in just momentary conversation than I think I did previously. You know, I go up the street to get coffee, and there was a man standing in front of the church. And when I came back, he was still standing in front of the church, in the same spot, an older man. So I said to him, you know, this is exactly where you were when I went the other direction. And he said, exactly, you know. But it was like that 2-second conversation was like something I wouldn't have done before. A lot of it has to do with a year and a half being locked up during the COVID crisis, you know, seeing almost no people, and just like, that's been a very brutal thing. If you're going to survive in this world, you've got to see positive, focus more on the positive than the negative. And I think for the first half of my life, the negative was what I focused on, which was why throughout this whole conversation, the one thing I regret having said was the one negative comment I said about somebody, because I really want to erase those thoughts from my recollection and not have them control my life, because believe me, I had enormous stresses in my life at many different periods.
Do you want to talk about them?
Not really, other than to say that they're behind me, I really feel. But a lot of it was that, especially when I was in Long Island City, I lived in desolation. I mean, it was a really desolate area. I worked at PS1, but I would only work there when the exhibitions went up. And then when the show was up, I would be off. So I stayed within my dark room and within my little world, I think you have to have a purpose.
What was your purpose?
I've thought about this on occasion. Throughout my growing up, most people thought art and being an artist was a frivolous endeavor, something that serious people didn't do. And one person who was my champion and who definitely constantly supported me and stood up to a lot of the criticism was my mom. So a lot of what I do, excuse me, is to honor her. You can see how emotional I get over that, but it was a battle. People were incredibly cruel. But the beautiful thing about life's experiences and the people that you're surrounded by, it's just luck.
That's the most essential lesson you got from the past. Luck.
Well, luck falls in your hands in certain ways. Yes, that is luck. Some of that is luck, that just when you're about to fall, someone catches you. When I was living in Long Island City and being really quite reclusive and desolate, somehow I found this restaurant where I took photographs of the owners, Vincent and Ida, and they fed me, and they also gave me a home in a neighborhood that was, after 3 o'clock at night, Long Island City was a total desolate, barren wilderness. And there I was, this long-haired, bearded guy, and they were now confronted with all these artists from PS1 and this whole world coming there. So I was basically a liaison between them and this new experience, With Gene Smith, when he left, when our building got torn down, he had already left his studio, but his darkroom was there. And I took that. The guy who was there didn't want it, so he gave me Gene's darkroom, which I transferred to Long Island City and put into my space. But then I noticed he would write little quotes on the side of the walls of the darkroom. And he wrote things like, people look at clouds and think they're... People look at clouds and think they're clouds, but I see souls. And I think, who says that? What kind of person thinks like that? Or can come up with that kind of image in their head? I thank you for giving me a chance to remember some of this so that I can share it too. Because these people shared their lives with me, and by doing that, it made my life better.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard, for sharing your story. It was Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Music Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.